They still speak of me in whispers, centuries later. They don't know it was me who sowed the fear, the panic, and the madness that seized Salem like a vice. I hear them on dark nights, the tourists who come in droves to Gallows Hill, daring one another to see the ghost of a woman in white, or to listen to the echoes of screams carried on the wind. They always leave when the sun sinks too low, when the shadows stretch too long. Some say the air grows colder, and they smell the faintest trace of burning flesh, but they never stay long enough to learn the truth. I still live, you see, in plain sight, just as I always have. But there's one story they never tell, one piece of my past that even I have kept hidden. When I first came to Salem, I didn't come seeking a husband. No, I came as a witch, drawn to the shadows of the town where superstition ran deep and power lay hidden in the cracks of its foundation. I had no use for love or companionship. I had only my magic and my plans. But then I met Henry. He was different, charming in a way that I hadn't expected. He saw me as no one else did, and before I knew it, I found myself bound to him in a way I never intended. I had power beyond what he could understand, but in those early days, I let myself believe that love could matter more than magic. How foolish was I? After we lost the baby, everything changed. I had carried him for months, feeling his tiny kicks, dreaming of what our life would be with him in it. But when he was born, silent and cold, all those dreams died with him. The midwife said that there was nothing I could have done, but I knew better. I had power. I had magic. But even that couldn't save him. And after that, I couldn't have any more children. The thought of trying again, it was as if something inside me had shut down, a curse I could never lift. Henry changed too. In the beginning, he grieved with me. We cried together, held each other in the dark of night, but slowly, he started pulling away. His touch grew colder, his words more distant, like I was some fragile thing he didn't know how to hold anymore. He stopped looking at me the way he used to, as if losing our son had taken not just him, but a piece of us. And maybe it had. I could feel him drifting, no longer the man who had once loved me so completely. I knew he wanted more, wanted something I could no longer give, and that's when I began to see him with her. That's when everything began to unravel. The townspeople of Salem had long been aware of Henry's affair with Bridget Bishop. It wasn't difficult to spot the stolen glances, the secretive smiles, and the times they both disappeared from the town square at the same moment. Their trysts in the woods just outside the village were no mystery to the eyes that watched for gossip like vultures circling carrion. Rumors swirled, hushed whispers exchanged over market stalls and in the corners of the tavern. But no one dared to breathe a word of it to me. The town knew that I had recently suffered the most devastating of losses. My grief was palpable, a quiet storm I held within myself, and the townspeople believed me to be fragile, teetering on the edge of breaking. They saw the heaviness in my eyes, the way I carried myself like a ghost, lingering in the shadow of grief. After all, losing a child was enough heartbreak for any mother to bear, and to add the betrayal of my husband's affair with a woman like Bridget seemed too cruel, even for Salem. No one wanted to be the one to shatter what little remained of my world, so they stayed silent, out of a twisted sense of mercy, leaving me in the dark while the affair continued. They told themselves it was for my own good, but deep down, they feared the wrath of a woman who had already lost so much. It was late one evening, just as the sun began to set, when I followed him. He had left the cottage, saying he was going to check on the horses, but something about his manner was strange, hurried. I waited a few moments before slipping out behind him, moving quietly through the thick trees that surrounded our home on the outskirts of town. And there, just beyond the edge of the woods, I found them. Bridget, pressed against a tree, her hands tangled in his hair, and Henry, my Henry, kissing her as if he had no wife, no promises, no loyalty, and no grief. The fury that boiled in my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt before. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make my presence known. No, I stood there, hidden among the shadows, and watched. They were so lost in each other they didn't even see me, didn't hear the quiet rage that was building inside of me. When Henry finally left her, heading back towards the cottage with a smug grin on his face, I followed him at a distance, my mind already working. I knew what I would do. I had known it from the moment I saw them. When I returned home, I greeted him as I always did, with a calm smile and soft words. He never suspected a thing, the fool. He ate the supper I had prepared, drank the wine I poured him, and then he kissed me goodnight as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. I had poisoned him, though not in the way he might have expected. I used my magic. Dark, subtle magic that would eat away at him slowly, day by day, until his body could no longer bear the weight of my curse. It started with a cough, just a little tickle in the back of his throat that he tried to ignore. Then came the fevers, the nights where he would sweat and shiver, his skin pale and clammy. He thought it was an illness, something that would pass, but I knew better. I watched him suffer, watched his strength fade as the poison I had cast worked its way through his veins. Bridget didn't come around after that. Perhaps she sensed something was wrong, or perhaps she grew bored of him. It didn't matter. I had taken care of it. By the time Henry died, no one suspected me. They thought it was a sickness, punishment from God, maybe even the result of some sin he had committed in secret. But I knew. I had crafted his death with my own hands, using the same magic I would later wield to destroy others. Bridget Bishop, though, would not escape my wrath so easily. It was a night like any other, at least to those foolish enough not to notice the difference. I had set my table, a circle of candles flickering softly in the darkened corners of my home. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. The pages of my old grimoire, whispering to me as I prepared. That night, I called upon something darker than I had ever dared before. Vanity is a wicked thing, and so easy to twist. In my mind, I saw the face of the entire town. First, the women shall suffer. They could have shared my husband's sin. Instead, they lost my trust. And Bridget Bishop, with her delicate features and gleaming hair, her smooth skin that drew the lustful eyes of men in my Henry. I hated her for it, but I had the power to take it away. I placed my hands on the wooden table, the planchette I had carved from bone resting beneath my fingertips, waiting for the spirits to answer my call. I could feel the pull of the otherworldly forces shifting around me, a cold draft that circled the room, rattling the shutters outside. With a whispered incantation, I summoned an ancient and bitter force from the depths, a darkness that fed on envy and corruption. I asked for its blessing, a curse upon those who dared flaunt their beauty so freely. "They shall rot," I whispered, my voice growing stronger as the candles flickered wildly. "Let their beauty crumble and wither like fruit left in the sun. May their faces bear the marks of their pride. Let their youth betray them." The air thickened, and I felt the spirits shift in response. Shadows swirled in the corners, and I could almost hear them laughing, delighted at the cruelty I had devised. A cold draft ran over my skin, and I knew my command had been heard. When the sickness came to Salem, no one knew where it had originated, but I did. Smallpox spread swiftly, but I made sure the women who pranced through the town with their high noses and soft hands were the first to fall. It began on their faces, naturally. I had asked for nothing less. Pustules bloomed like flowers beneath their eyes, their lips cracking and bleeding as the disease ravaged their beauty. "What a shame," the men said, shaking their heads. "How quickly such loveliness can fade." I watched as they were forced to hide their faces behind cloths and scarves, their skin peeling and scarring in ways that no ointment could fix. I smiled as they wept, as they looked into mirrors and saw the reflection of the thing they feared most, ugliness. But it wasn't enough. The sickness in their flesh was only part of the punishment. I wanted them to suffer deeper, in ways they couldn't escape. When the trials began, Bridget was the first one to be accused. I made sure of it. The first trial of June 10th, 1692, still echoes in my mind. I sat quietly among the crowd, my bonnet pulled low over my brow, watching with satisfaction as Bridget Bishop was led to the gallows. She had nothing to do with magic, of course, but I had planted the seed of doubt in the minds of those who mattered. It didn't take much, just a whisper here, a suggestion there. The men in Salem were eager to find a villain, and I gave them one. I watched as they accused her, dragging her through the filth of the courthouse, tying the noose around her neck. The air that day was hot and oppressive, the sky cloudless, and the sun unrelenting. They said it was the judgment of God, that the earth itself was condemning the witches. But it was me. I smiled as she hanged, knowing that justice, my justice, had been served. Bridget had lusted after what was mine, and she paid the price. Her death was a warning, not just to the town, but to me. A reminder of what I could do, of the power I held, and oh, how I have missed it. I had summoned the heat, pulled it from deep within the earth, and cast it upon the town. The summer of 1692 became the driest anyone could remember. The fields turned to dust, crops shriveled before they could be harvested, and the people began to starve. I watched from my small cottage on the edge of the village as their suffering deepened with every passing day. The town believed it was purging itself, purifying the land, but the land was dying by my hand. The heat cracked the earth, but their minds were too clouded by fear to see it. I smiled to myself as I watched them turn their gaze inward, searching for more to blame. The gallows were busy that summer, the nooses worn thin from constant use. Each hanging was a step further from the truth. And every dry, dusty day was a reminder of the power I held. But even as the earth baked and cracked under my spell, I was already preparing for what was to come. I knew the heat wouldn't last forever, and the people would soon look for relief from the misery I had created. And so, as the leaves began to fall in early autumn, I cast my next spell, a much darker one. I wanted to give them something to remember, something colder than they could bear. As the autumn of 1692 wore on, the townsfolk spoke of strange happenings. The weather had turned colder than expected. Frost appeared earlier than anyone could remember, killing crops and stealing their harvest right from under their noses. The skies darkened with snow before they should, and even the strongest men trembled beneath the weight of that unnatural cold. I could hear their murmurs, their confusion, as they blamed the changing winds on God's wrath, on some divine punishment. By late November, the snow was already knee-deep, and the wind carried a biting chill that cut through every layer of cloth. It wasn't natural, and I made sure of that. I had woven the spell weeks before, sitting alone in the dark of my house, whispering to the storm spirits. I poured my intent into the flames of my hearth, calling forth winter so cruel that it would gnaw at the very bones of the town. I didn't want Salem to just suffer. I wanted them to turn on each other, to see their own kind as the source of their misery. The spell worked flawlessly. By December, snow covered the land, but it was not the soft snow of winters past. It was ice, thick, hard, and unforgiving. It clung to the roofs of their homes, caving them in under its weight. The rivers froze solid, cutting off their water supply. Animals perished in their pens, unable to withstand the biting cold, and the townsfolk huddled together, shivering beneath layers of ragged blankets. They pointed to the women who had fallen victim to the smallpox first, but the ones whose beauty had withered, whose faces had turned to ruins of what they once were. The men of Salem, so quick to turn, were easily swayed. The cold had numbed their minds, as much as their fingers. "She did this," they would say, casting suspicious eyes at Sarah Good or Elizabeth Proctor. "She called this winter in revenge for losing her looks, for the men no longer wanting her." And so, just as I had planned, the town began to accuse. The women I had cursed with smallpox were now branded witches themselves, guilty of the second sin. How ironic, that those who had once flaunted their beauty were now accused of turning the season deadly, all because the men would no longer take them as wives or give them children. Salem grew darker by the day, as the men of the town railed the condemned to their own neighbors, convinced that these cursed women had drawn the bitter winter upon them. They said the snow was a reflection of their cold hearts, that the frost had come from their mouths, cursing the men who scorned them. It was a beautiful lie, and I watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. The men grew more desperate to prove that the women accused of witchcraft were indeed agents of the devil. With the chill sinking into their bones, they devised crueler methods, believing that the cold itself would reveal the truth. They dragged women from their homes, shivering and pleading for mercy, and built great pyres on Gallows Hill. They believed that if these women were truly witches, the flames would not consume them, that their cursed bodies would resist the fire. But as the wood crackled and the flames climbed higher, their screams echoed through the frosty air. The snow melted around the pyres, turning to mud beneath the weight of the townspeople's fear. The fire consumed them all, one after another, their innocence burning away with each ember, but no proof of witchcraft was ever found. Only ash scattered into the winter wind. They never suspected Bonnie Blair, but the hill remembers. They think witches are the stuff of legend, but I am proof that legends can still draw breath. The witches they hung were innocent, of course. They had no hand in the cold, the smallpox, the suffering of the town. But they were convenient, and as the flames crackled at Gallows Hill and their bodies swung in the wind, I smiled, knowing I was safe for another season, another century. The flames never touched me. They never will. The tourist who leave in fear will never know that the terror they seek still walks among them. I've learned to blend in, to change my face as the centuries pass. They say witches are the stuff of legend, but I am proof that legends can still draw breath. Now, the world has changed. I have seen empires rise and fall, and yet humanity remains predictable, vulnerable to the same vanity and pride. They haven't changed as much as they think they have. No, they are still as vain, still as blind to their own downfall. It's just, they no longer need mirrors to see themselves. Today, they carry their vanity with them. Their reflections are no longer found in glass, but in the glowing screens they hold so tightly in their hands. Phones, they call them. But to me, they are scrying mirrors, portals into their deepest obsessions. Social media, the new form of self-worship. They spend hours each day crafting perfect versions of themselves to show the world, but they are blind to what is happening around them. They don't notice me anymore. They pass by, their faces lit by those little screens, too absorbed to even glance in my direction. They take selfies, post pictures of their food, their faces, desperate for the approval of others, just as those women in Salem were desperate for the attention of the men. The irony is not lost on me. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I walk among them, unnoticed, just as I always have. These days, I work at the Salem Witch Museum. They hired me because of my knowledge of the trials. How could they resist someone who speaks with such authority, such detail? I weave my stories for the visitors, telling them about the innocent women who were hung at Gallows Hill, about the trials, the fear, the paranoia. I recount their lives, their deaths, and how the town fell into madness. I guide people through exhibits, speaking of curses, of old superstitions, of terror that swept through the town like wildfire. They listen, but not really. Their eyes drift back to their phones, their minds already planning their next post, the next photo to capture. They take pictures of the gallows, of the artifacts we've collected, of me standing before them, and they don't even realize they're looking at the one who started it all. The very woman who sent those innocent souls to their deaths. They nod politely as I tell them about the injustices, the cruelty, but it's all just another story to them. Something to like, share, and move on from. They don't understand the weight of what I did, the guilt I should feel, but never will. You see, I never felt guilt. I never felt remorse. Those women, Bridget, Sarah, Elizabeth, they were all just means to an end. I sacrificed them to save myself, and I would do it again, over and over, if it meant living forever. Every day, I tell the story of the Salem Witch Trials. But they are not the stories of witches. They are the stories of innocent women I sent to their deaths to protect my own secret. I tell their stories with a smile, knowing full well that I was the true cause of their suffering. I watch the tourists leave, snapping photos, posting updates about the creepy museum on their social media accounts. They tag the location, make sure everyone knows that they were here, and move on with their lives. None of them will ever know the truth, that the witch they so eagerly seek, the one they read about in history books, is standing right in front of them. They believe witches are creatures of the past, but I have learned to blend in. I've changed my face, my name, my story, as the centuries passed. Today, I am just Mrs. Blair, the helpful museum guide, sharing tales of the past. But I still watch. I still wait. I see the same vanity and pride that I saw in those women all those years ago. It's easier now, though, with their faces illuminated by their phones, staring endlessly at their own reflection. They are ripe for the picking, and I sometimes wonder if I could cast another curse. Perhaps something that targets their precious screens, turns their reflections against them. But for now, I bide my time. I live among them, watching as they doom themselves with every selfie, every boastful post, every hollow compliment. They still speak of me in whispers, but they don't know it's me. I am eternal.